It's really gratifying to see so many people have taken time out of their busy schedules to take part in this debate. I want to say at the outset, by way of welcome as well, that there will be people in the audience today who have personal experiences of assisted fertility, and I really hope you will put your questions and your thoughts, your concerns, your experiences to our speakers today. And there'll be other people in the audience as well who have specialist knowledge from various fields, not just within women's health. And we really value and welcome your comments too. And that's really the point of today's meeting and today's debate, which is to bring people together from a wide set of backgrounds and disciplines, specialists as well as non-specialists, to confront these questions that are really part of a much wider conversation outside of women's health, outside of this university. Just to mark that really at the outset, a survey done back in October showed that 2 out of 18 tech companies in London were considering paying female employees for egg freezing and delayed motherhood. So this is not just an American phenomenon. These are questions that we all have to grapple with. And that is really the thought and vision behind the idea for a Center for Ethics in Women's Health, which we're hoping to set up at UCL, building on decades of work previously at the Institute and beyond. It's intended as a place where all these ethical and bioethical questions can be worked through and debated in an interdisciplinary setting. At UCL's Institute for Women's Health, there are 4 departments: reproductive health, maternal fetal medicine, neonatology, and women's cancer. And there are people in the audience here from all of those departments. But it's really important to make this a much bigger conversation as well. And I'm very proud and delighted that we have 2 top-notch speakers today. Joyce Harper is a professor of human genetics and embryology at UCL. She has been working in this field, in the field of IVF, since the late 80s, and is one of the pioneers in pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. She's responsible for initiating and running not just 1 but 2 masters in women's health and reproduction, and plays a major role in women's education, in medical education at UCL. Nikki Hudson is a medical sociologist with particular expertise in the social aspects of reproduction. She's a reader at the Montfort University in Leicester, where she's come down from today, and she leads the reproduction research group. She's got 6 PhD students working in medical sociology, meaning that she herself actually has more research activity in this area than the whole of UCL put together. So at the outset, I also wanted to acknowledge and mention that this event today forms part of a larger program of events that we've had this week in honor and in order to celebrate International Women's Day, which is this Sunday, 8th of March. And I want to acknowledge Professor Judith Stevenson, who's led this effort from UCL. As well as an introductory comment, I just wanted to make sure that we're aware and that we're mindful about our language and the scope of our conversation today, and to say that today's topic is about egg freezing is relevant to everyone, and it goes without saying that there are it's an issue that is a big question for many women. It's also an issue for men, and there are a few men in the audience. Perhaps we shouldn't have put all the posters in the women's loos, but that's great because we want this conversation to be much wider. And it's worth saying at the outset that there are more than 2 genders, and there are more than one way for a couple to have babies. The most important part, really, of today's debate is you and your voice, and who have come here to take part. And we want you to take part in one of 3 ways. You've all hopefully been given some white cards where you can write down comments and hold them up, and somebody will collect them from you. If you want to ask a particular question to an individual speaker, then please direct your question as appropriate. You can also pose a question directly using, we have 2 roaming mics today. And I should say at the outset that this debate will be filmed and will be publicly available. And finally, you can use Twitter to comment as well. So we're in the business of providing disruptive thinking for hopefully the best possible reasons, and we want you to add your thoughts to the mix. So first off, Professor Joyce Harper.
Get rid of that picture. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. So, as Dan said, I'm a Professor of Human Genetics and Embryology here at UCL in the Institute for Women's Health. And it's a really great pleasure for me to be involved in this discussion this afternoon about, does egg freezing enable women to have it all? So I'd like to start with a little bit of history of IVF, because without IVF we wouldn't be having this discussion. We need IVF to generate the eggs so that we can actually freeze them. Now, IVF started back in 1978 with the birth of Louise Brown. With the birth of Louise Brown, and this was the pioneering work of Bob Edwards and Steptoe, and they worked at Bourne Hall and the University of Cambridge. And in 2010, Bob was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work in this field. And Louise Brown had her own child a few years ago, and it was in 1987, as Dan said, that I started working in IVF. And I first started off running a clinical IVF laboratory, and there I helped thousands of women get pregnant, and thousands of couples get pregnant, and it was an amazingly rewarding job. But I was busy at the time with my career and travelling the world and doing lots of other things, and time goes very rapidly. And I got to 35, and that only then met my partner, and we started trying to have children. So this is a really personal journey for me as well. So I realised quite soon that I couldn't get pregnant naturally, and embarked on 5 years of very intensive IVF treatment of my own. And here's my son here. My first son was born just before my 40th birthday. And then I had IVF twins a few years later who were born from frozen embryo transfer. So as you see, this is really a personal journey for me as well. Now, IVF technology has really developed since the time of Louise Brown's birth. We've got Dolly the sheep here from reproductive cloning. Next to this, we've got therapeutic cloning, which was shown in the film The Island, where you can generate a copy of yourself to generate spare parts. Hopefully that's not happening yet, but certainly could possibly happen in the future. The Handmaid's Tale looks at surrogacy. We can now use surrogacy and egg donation for homosexual couples to be able to have their own child. And Gattaca represents the work that I mainly do. I work on pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, where we're testing a pre-implantation embryo on its genetic status to help couples at risk of transmitting genetic disease. But this field's being expanded at the moment, and we can now use lots of genetic tests on that one embryo. But we're here today to talk about frozen babies through frozen eggs. So let's have a little bit of biology first. Why do we need to freeze a woman's egg? Is there any need to do this procedure? Well, unfortunately, women's eggs reduce in number and quality daily. So in the uterus, we have about 7 million what we call primordial follicles, which contain an egg, that something can develop into an egg. By birth, this is reduced to about 1 to 2 million. And this reduction and decrease in the quality of these potential eggs really goes down very rapidly from puberty through to the menopause. And after 35 years, we've really got a significant reduction in our fertility. And after the age of 42, it's really very difficult to get pregnant. And if anyone wants to see some data on this, you can look at the HFEA website, and they show the pregnancy rates in IVF units by ages, and you'll see that as women get older, these pregnancy and delivery rates really decline. So it's a shame that our female fertility is closely related to the age of the egg, but that is certainly the case. So we know that as the egg ages, we have a decrease in the egg quality, and we unfortunately have an increase in chromosome abnormalities. So we've got an increased risk of having a child that has a chromosome abnormality such as Down syndrome. So it is really on the age of the egg. So if we look at a 25-year-old egg donor and donate this egg to a woman in her 40s, the woman in her 40s will have the pregnancy rate of a 25-year-old. So the uterus is really quite a robust structure. fertility is really related to the age and the quality of the egg. So really what's happened is we're now living till our 80s and 90s, and we're leading much healthier lives, but our fertility by the age of 35 starts to rapidly decrease. So evolution, in my view, has not kept up with feminism. We're under biological and social pressure to have our children young. But do we want to have our children young? Well, why are we delaying having children? Why don't we just all have our children when we're 25? Or even better, when we're 15 or 20? That's our probably most fertile time. Well, career is something that always comes up. And I've written here, why not? Why shouldn't women be allowed to have a career? My argument today would be, surely we can have all the things that men can have. And I put this argument on Facebook a few weeks ago, and I said to my friends that I was giving this talk, and a few people said, well, I don't think we can have it all, because we can't juggle these things. But I'm very much an optimist, and I think we can have it all. Why shouldn't we have a good career? In a few weeks, I have to give a talk at our local high school, and they've asked me during Science Week to give a careers talk on how a woman succeeds in a man's world. Now, I was quite shocked that they felt that teenagers need to hear this talk. But if you sit back and look at the data on this, the careers for women are not at the moment level with careers for men. So unfortunately, we have to address this. But we are changing that. Why shouldn't we change that? I think we should. People may not have found the right partner. People want to do other things. They want to travel and do lots of exciting things that we're able to do in today's society. 50 years ago, it would be very unusual for a woman to travel the world on her own. Now, you can travel with your friends or on your own, and it's quite an accepted thing to do that. And also financial. You're building your career, you may want to be in a financially secure situation, one, to deliver childcare, which is very expensive, or also just to provide for your children. And if you look at the data internationally, almost all cultures now are increasing the age of first conception. So this, if you look at the data, I did a few Googles about this, you'll get amazing data where most of the women now are having their children, certainly in the UK, the data is really amazing. We're really having our children much later than we did even 20 years ago. And what happens now is that we're delaying trying to get pregnant. So these are the patients that we often see in our IVF unit. The average age of a patient in an IVF unit is about 38 years of age. So at 38, majority of those patients are going to be the 35 cutoff that I said earlier. So these patients are, probably most of them could have got pregnant naturally when they were in their 20s, but now they've hit 38 or more, they're finding it very hard to get pregnant naturally. For these patients, to try and stimulate an older patient to go through IVF, you've got to give increasing amounts of fertility drugs. You've got to have repeated IVF cycles to try and get pregnant. As again, you can have a look at the HFEA data on this. So it's much more costly trying to go through IVF when you're in your late 30s, early 40s, and there's the safety implication of the amount of stimulation, etc., that you'd need to try and achieve this. So what's the options for someone who's in their late 30s, early 40s, and they find they can't get pregnant naturally and they can't get pregnant by IVF? Well, they could opt for egg donation, where they would not have their genetically child, they'd have a donor egg from a younger woman. They could decide that they don't have any children at all, or they could opt for adoption, which I think is probably the hardest option of that, certainly in the UK. But now we have another alternative for them. Now we have social egg freezing. So why haven't we had this before? Why are we just debating this now? Why not 10 years ago? IVF's been here since 1978. Well, the methods have only just started working. So the egg is a very big structure with a huge amount of cytoplasm with this very fragile nucleus inside, which contains half of the woman's chromosomes. And this structure has been very, very hard to freeze safely without disrupting the viability and also those chromosomes within the egg. So it was only in 1999 that a new method called vitrification was applied to a human egg, and we had the first birth following oocyte vitrification or egg vitrification. And in 2012, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine stated that this procedure of egg freezing was no longer an experimental procedure and could now be classed as a clinical treatment. But there are some important things that we have to think about. It's not all rosy. We have to think that really you need to freeze your eggs when you're young. Freezing your eggs when you're 38 or 40 is not going to lead to a good success. So most of the papers on this, and I would agree, would be that you need to freeze them under 35. You do need to go through IVF to generate these embryos. So that is a difficult procedure, as I've already outlined, but it's much easier to do when you're 25 than if you're 45. It is expensive, very expensive. So that leads to some discussions about fertility treatment for those that have money and those that don't. But this is a problem we have in the UK anyway. And freezing these eggs does not guarantee that you're going to have a child, but it is something to think about, and I think we can discuss that when we follow up after our first presentations. And when the time came that when the woman wanted to have her family, she doesn't need to use these frozen eggs. She may decide just to reproduce naturally and hope that everything work out, but those eggs are there for her as a backup. I would still advocate that the best chance of getting pregnant is naturally when you're young, but that's not the case for everyone. So just let's have a look at why we're freezing human eggs, just generally. A lot of work has been done on freezing these eggs for cancer patients, because when you have certain chemotherapies and radiotherapies, you knock out these eggs and you make them non-viable. So if we freeze the eggs before, it gives these patients a chance to have a child, their own biological child, when they're free from the cancer. Also the development of donor egg banks, and it overcomes some ethical and religious issues related to embryo freezing. And delayed fertility, social egg freezing that we're discussing today. So, as Dan already mentioned, we've got companies now that are offering their staff to have their eggs frozen. And I must admit, even myself, when I first heard about Facebook and Apple, I did cringe. I thought, oh, that's maybe, is that going too far? And I read this very good article online from Time magazine, and they mentioned that these other companies, as well as I'm sure many others, are also offering their staff to freeze their eggs for them, or some aspect of that. And the more I read about it, the more I thought about it and pondered. I thought, well, it certainly will make women much more attractive to employ. If you employ a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old who hasn't started a family, chances are as an employer that she's going to stop at some point to have a family, and that becomes very expensive. So this evens out the playing field and makes the woman not seem such a financial liability to a company. And I'm sure that, I know they're not supposed to, but I'm sure they do take this into consideration when they're employing somebody. It keeps female talent in post, so we're not restricted. We're playing on the same playing field now as any man applying for a job. And it gives women, in my view, equal rights to men. But it does, the negative side, it does give a pressurisation for women to keep working. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of social egg freezing. The advantages are it removes the biological clock. It gives the woman control over her own fertility and her own life. She can go travelling, she can do anything that a man can do. She's got no need to put her career on hold and no need to rush to find a partner. So this also reduces the need to go through IVF, as I had to do when she's older. And it also will reduce the chance of chromosome abnormalities in her offspring, because she'll freeze the eggs when she's young, when they're at lower risk of having a chromosome abnormality. There are disadvantages. There's the cost. The IVF, having to go through IVF, is very, very difficult. It's very stressful, very emotional procedure to go through. It might not work. They might come to use those eggs when they're 40 and find that they don't get pregnant. That is something they have to be aware of. There may be pressure, as I said, from the companies to keep working, and there are risks to older women that achieve a pregnancy. In the UK, the regulations for use of egg donors is that you have to be under 50. The same should be set for so people that have frozen their eggs. They'd have to use these frozen eggs before they're 50. So, just to finish off, does egg freezing enable women to have it all? Well, I've said there, yes. I would still encourage women to have children young. I think we need to provide good childcare. We need workplaces to be flexible. Even if they offer social egg freezing, they should also offer excellent childcare facilities. So now we've got an informed choice. We've got two options. We can have our children young, naturally, or we could freeze our eggs and delay this for when we feel ready to do it. So we now have a viable reproductive option with egg freezing. And I certainly would have done it at 25. If I was 25 now, me personally, I would have frozen my eggs. So I didn't have to go through those 5 years of fertility treatment that I did. And the last slide, just to point out these two papers. Françoise Shenfield's here in the audience. She's one of the authors of the first paper from the ESHRE Task Force on Law and Ethics. And this excellent paper can be freely downloadable from the ESHRE website. And this other paper as well looks at some of the views of women thinking about going through this procedure. Thank you.
I think she's persuaded me. Thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to take part in what I think is going to be a great discussion. I think that's probably the first time that I've ever participated in a conference where the music soundtrack has been Beyonce, so that's also very exciting. So, what I would like to do is pose some alternative questions for the debate this afternoon. So on the face of it, social egg freezing is quite a seductive and quite a neat technological solution to the problem of how women juggle their lives and their careers, as we've heard from Joyce. So it appears to present women with much more choice about how they can manage their lives, how they can manage their life goals and so on. We know that women are having babies later. The statistics tell us that they're doing that anyway. So shouldn't we just allow this in order for women to be able to take more control and to pursue other life goals in the meantime? I would like to suggest that whilst that is the appearance of egg freezing is that women have more control over their reproductive choices, that choice is actually an illusion. That actually, maybe perhaps quite controversially, I'd like to suggest that egg freezing is not a particularly woman-friendly technology at all. So I'd like to pose some alternative questions for us to consider this afternoon. So, as Joyce has already touched on, what I'd like us to consider first of all is the likelihood that IVF is a reliable and egg freezing is a reliable solution to this problem in the first place. As we've heard, egg freezing requires IVF in order to work. So often in the media we see this kind of headline around social egg freezing as this great new technology that will allow women to freeze their reproductive potential until later on. But what's left out of those representations quite often is the other half of that story, that they will also need to go through treatment further down the line in order to be able to use those eggs. IVF, as we also know, is far from reliable in technological terms. 25% is the average live birth rate. 25% of women who will actually end up with a child at the end of IVF is still the average for UK statistics. That's 75% of people who embark on IVF who are never successful. That's a huge failure rate by anybody's measure. So if we couple that with the early research that's coming out around social egg freezing about who's actually doing this, we see that actually most of the women that are doing this are well over the age of 35. The average is around 38 in the studies that have been published so far. We've got some research going on in our own group with women who are freezing their eggs, and that also echoes amongst British women what is happening, that women are actually delaying and not freezing their eggs till later either. So we're talking about even lower success rates once they want to use their eggs in order to have a child. So egg freezing is sort of discussed as this easy, routine possibility to fix this problem of reproductive timing when we know that the parent technology, IVF, is unreliable, it's painful, it's time-consuming, it's emotionally fraught, and it's really expensive. There are also questions about safety. So this is in terms of both the IVF protocols, egg retrieval carries risks with it, but also risks in the longer term that we really don't know very much about yet. There are risks associated with pregnancy and childbirth for women of older age. This includes things like preeclampsia, high risk of C-section during childbirth. So whilst egg freezing might preserve some elements of fertility, it might allow us to freeze the potential for fertility later on, it can't stop the biological clock altogether. It doesn't fix this entire problem. So what we might want to ask ourselves is, should we be encouraging otherwise healthy women to undergo a technique that is fraught with difficulties and potentially risky in health terms? Social egg freezing is also a commercial enterprise. We've talked already about the cost of IVF. Some of you may be aware that IVF is not a cheap option. So freezing eggs equally is expensive and takes place in the private sphere. We don't have egg freezing on the NHS, and I'm not sure we ever will be in a situation where that happens. IVF regularly polls low down on people's priorities in terms of where we should be funding healthcare. So we might imagine that social egg freezing might be even lower down people's agendas in terms of public funding. So the price tag, the pretty hefty price tag for this, is going to be picked up by the individuals involved, by the women themselves. So in sociological terms, social egg freezing represents what sociologists and anthropologists would refer to as an example par excellence of stratified reproduction. And this is the idea that some women have opportunities, reproductive opportunities, that other women don't in economic terms. So the hugely inhibitive expense associated with egg freezing might mean that some women can have it all, but certainly not all women, certainly not the majority of women, certainly not women from lower socioeconomic groups, including some women from certain minority ethnic communities. So we're actually talking about egg freezing for the affluent minority. We're talking about a very small number of women that might actually benefit from this. So we might ask the question, should we be promoting a technique that actually only improves the welfare and the well-being of a certain group of women and not all women? So for me as a sociologist, one of the big questions that comes up relates to society and women's place within that, and what all of this means for women's equality in employment and in society more generally. And I think this really relates quite nicely to this, these more recent developments around the offer of employers offering egg freezing, social egg freezing as an employment perk. So if we think in terms of wider society and women's place within society, what egg freezing is actually doing is taking a social problem that we have, this potential that women have for the problem of how they juggle careers with childbearing, when to take time off work, if to take time off work, when to go back to work, and it puts it firmly on the shoulders of women. It says this is a social problem that actually requires a social solution, but it places it with the individual woman and says, actually, this is your problem, you sort it out. And I think in doing so, it reinforces what are already fairly well ingrained gendered norms about what women's and men's roles are. In the public imagination, reproduction sits quite firmly in the realm of women's lives and women's health. So reproduction is seen very much as the responsibility of women. So the title of today's panel discussion, can women have it all? Well, I would ask, what about the men? Where are the men? It is nice to see that we've got a few men here. But we need to be looking at this in terms of equality. We need to be thinking about women's position and what this means and what it says to women about whose responsibility reproduction and childbearing actually is. Isn't it? Shouldn't it be shared? So it relates to wider issues around childcare, the provision of childcare, and also the sharing of childcare within the home and men's responsibility in that too, and ideas around flexible working arrangements and shared parental leave. Shared parental leave is a relatively new initiative, yet we haven't seen anywhere near the amount of publicity around that, and we know very little about how employers are going to actually implement shared parental leave in the employment sphere. So what we should be asking is, what are employers doing to make life easier for men and for women in employment terms? So for me, the fact that we're still asking this question, can women have it all, really highlights something very worrying about where we are in gender terms, in gender equality terms. So just quickly, a few figures to consider and to remind us really about women and where they are in relationship to employment and pay more generally. So the full-time gender pay gap is still 10%. So for men and women in full-time employment, women still earn 10% on average less than women. For all employees, it's around 19-20%. So that's quite a big gap still. At least 75% of mothers have primary responsibility for childcare in the home. So 3/4 of mothers have primary responsibility. Again, where are the men? More women than men return to work part-time after having a child. 38% of women versus 7% of men go back to work part-time after they've had a child. It's estimated that for every year a woman spends outside of the workforce, her future earnings reduce by 5% for every year she takes out. So if you think about a woman who may have 2 or 3 children, the impact that will have on her later earnings. And quite astonishingly, around 70% of people earning the national minimum wage are women. So women really do come up quite short in equality terms when we look at the facts around pay inequality. So we have a huge way to go still in order to address some of this equality. And for me, social egg freezing does nothing to address any of that. It basically takes the problem and it defers it to later on. It says, women, carry on working, give us your best years, and then have a baby later on, sort it out later when it's no longer our problem. So it sidesteps the bigger issue of gender equality and tells women this is your problem. So we might want to ask ourselves this alternative question around why is the government and employers not improving workplace policies rapidly and effectively enough to make juggling employment and childcare practical and manageable for women and men? Surely men want to be able to juggle and have it all as well. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to remember. Finally, I think one of the things that I'd like to also ask and pose the question to the audience is that, I think that we're not going to see a stampede of women in their 20s coming forward for egg freezing. And the reason for that is perhaps slightly more romantic, but also relates to some of the research findings that are coming out about social egg freezers and about who is using this technology. And that's about this idea of wanting to have a child in a partnership. And searching for a partner and how that has an impact on women's decisions about when to have a child. So I would like us to think about, how likely is it that women in their 20s are going to think, yeah, that will be me. I will need that technological backup plan. Looking back to being 25, would you think at that time, yes, how many of us ever want to think, well, things might go completely awry, I might not get the job I want, I might not have a relationship, I might not have children at the right time, I know what I'll do, I'll freeze my eggs. How many of us actually think like that? So I think it's unlikely that that's going to happen, and people are probably going to assume, as with most things in life, that won't happen to me, that won't apply to me. So for the time being at least, I think we need to ask the question, is this a technology that women are even going to engage with? Is this something that women are going to want? Thank you.
Joyce.
Right, good.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite convinced the other way. My first response would be, it's not just about careers. So you mentioned a lot about childcare and everything else, but it's not just about careers. We want to do other things. We want to travel the world, enjoy ourselves, go to parties, do more studying. So I think there's many issues here rather than just the careers and the delay of having a child because of that. Now, you quoted 25% of IVF results in pregnancy and delivery. One of the issues there is, as I've said, the average age of our patients in our IVF clinic is 38. So if we look at the HFEA figures by age, and the reason they split them up is because of the huge variation of age, you will see that if you try and get pregnant when you're 25, you have I can't remember the numbers that we have for the UK at the moment, but we have a hugely much more successful treatment than if you're 35 or 45. So if we're freezing those eggs when they're 25 years old, effectively, even if we transfer them later, we'll have a really significantly higher pregnancy rate. And this is a new technique at the moment. So yes, we are going to get people that are going to come forward at the moment who are in the age where we probably shouldn't be doing it. I've heard, I won't name anyone, but I've heard of a few singers and Hollywood actresses who are beyond the age where they should be freezing their eggs, and they're single, and they have been reportedly freezing their eggs. So we have got a new technique at the moment. There was some eggs frozen with old techniques, but we really need to think about the new technique and the success rate on the eggs of the correct age. And I totally agree with your comment about stratified reproduction. We have that anyway, unfortunately, in almost every country in the world. In the UK, it's a postcode lottery. You might get 1 or 2 cycles of IVF. It's really, really difficult to get funding for IVF treatment in the UK. So unfortunately for most people, they can only afford to have a child if they've got the money, which is thousands of pounds, to go through an IVF cycle. So this is something that's always been very dear to my heart, and I felt terrible when I've met couples who have had to give up having treatment because they just cannot afford to do this anymore. I didn't want to go into it now, but there are suggestions of ways you could have cheaper or free egg freezing, such as agreeing to donate some of your eggs, but I think that brings up lots of other issues that I didn't really want to step into that ballpark. My last comment is, before I had children, I was an equalist. I didn't call myself a feminist, I called myself an equalist. I felt men and women were equal and we could do everything equally. And then I got pregnant. Well, then I went through fertility treatment. Fertility treatment is seriously not equal. The man produces a sample of sperm. The woman, I won't even go what the woman has to have done, okay? It was, I don't even want to think about what I had to have done. Standing in an airport trying to inject myself with something before I got on a plane and everything else that you have to go through. So that was the start of me realising we're not equal. Then I got pregnant and then I realised we're seriously not equal. For 9 months I have been populated by an alien and I now feel like I'm a different person. I didn't want to do any of the things I wanted to do before. It totally changed me. And then I delivered my child, and then I breastfed my child for 8 months. So until we have the time, maybe we need to work on that next, when a man can carry the child, and a man can breastfeed the child, then we'll be truly equal, but we're certainly not there at the moment. So I agree it's not perfect, it's not a perfect solution, and it's not going to be for everybody. But I'm just glad that finally, after all these years since IVF first started, that we have now got on the table a viable option to delay motherhood for those that have the finances and who want to seek it. Thank you.
Yes, some interesting points. I mean, I would really want to pick up on a couple of things about, in terms of the medical technology, I think, and talking a little bit more about this process of medicalisation in relation to women's bodies. And the development of these technologies and what they mean for reproduction and how we understand reproduction in this medical intervention. And again, I think it really comes back to, you know, the idea that technology aside, that really we do think in terms of reproduction as being located with the women, and we don't think about that more generally. And I think, you know, that really goes back to this idea of women's bodies being the site of medical technological intervention, and, you know, the idea that is a very gendered process. So the process really concerns me in relation to that. I mean, some of the things that you said, Joyce, about giving women more choice, and certainly from the research that I've done with women who are involuntarily childless, being able to solve some of those problems is very seductive. But it is very difficult to hold that together with this idea that, you know, we're intervening, medically speaking, into women's lives when there is no need for medical intervention. Like, you know, some of these things could be solved in a more social way. They could be solved through other solutions. You know, when we think about men and their decisions about reproductive timing, you know, talking to men about what they think about this. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it, to think about how men would respond to the idea that they would need, because the corollary of all this is that men will also need to have their children through social egg freezing if lots more women use social egg freezing. So for me, it's really about thinking about how this is the further medicalisation of women's bodies, but also at the same time further pushing men outside of these debates, and we need to really consider bringing them back into the debates. My other kind of concern and question, I suppose, is around if the technology, that we know the technology is problematic in terms of, or the success rates are problematic if women are older, how do we go about convincing women in their 20s that this is a good idea? If there isn't a medical need for the treatment in their 20s, how on earth do we go about facilitating this? How do we persuade women that they need to freeze their eggs? Is that realistic? Is that something that we can really hope to achieve? I think one of the things that Joyce mentioned was the cultural issues in relationship to embryo freezing, for example, and I think that is interesting in relation to social egg freezing and thinking about the things that social egg freezing can do that embryo freezing, you know, isn't possible for some couples because of religious, cultural reasons. So I think I'm with you on that one. I think that is an interesting development that may well mean that some couples, some individuals may be more inclined to want to use social egg freezing because of those religious, cultural issues. And I think that's really something really interesting, and maybe we can pick that up in the debate. But yeah, I'm still not persuaded. I think for those reasons, you know, the ideas around medical intervention that this carries, I think, are for me really problematic, and there are lots of things we need to resolve. We need to know a lot more about how women and men think about these technologies before we go ahead and roll it out. It is only two years since the experimental label was lifted, and we still know very little about the longer term implications socially, medically, and I think we need a lot more research before we can start to make decisions about whether this is a good idea or a good solution.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the last part of this, the
Next 15 minutes or so, we really wanted to give the microphone and the opportunity for everyone else to participate in this debate. And so we have about 15 minutes, which is what we hoped we would have. Thank you both for your excellent presentations and for keeping to time. We have 2 microphones, and we will welcome questions, concerns, comments, vehement objections, personal experiences. There's a few hands in the air as well. If you don't want to speak, but you would like to pose your question on the card and just hold it up. Perhaps first, Dr. Francois Shenfield. Maybe if you want to introduce yourself at the beginning, but no need to.
Well, I'm Francois Shenfield. I work around the corner in the fertility unit of UCLH, and I'm also involved, as you saw, thanks to Joyce's slides, in 2 international ethics committees, one for our European Society for Reproduction, and the other one is FIGO, the International Federation of Obs and Gynae Societies. I think both presentations were really good. One a bit more provocative perhaps than the other. It is not the solution to everything. But the term choice, I think, is very well chosen in the title, because we can only have choice if we're well informed, and this is an ethical issue. You cannot make a choice if you don't have proper information. And I would argue that right now we don't have the whole information about the subject, and I agree more social and scientific research is needed. And actually we have started this at the level of our European Society, because what we need desperately is to tell the women, if you freeze your eggs at 35, this is, for the time being, the evidence we have, how many women have used them, with what success rate. That's what we're trying to do with the help of every single representative to our registry for Eritrea, which is the IVF register. So for the time being, we know there are 2 countries where it's practiced a lot because of regulations, in Spain and Italy. And most of the data come from there, and in Spain it comes a lot from young donors. So the message is the same. If you're young, you're much more likely to become pregnant. And just one argument with Joyce, actually, pregnancy for most women is a privilege, rather than feeling that you have an alien growing inside you. That's our experience, isn't it? I have an obstetrician next to me, so this is the plus for women, I always say. The men only have to give a sample in our clinics, but the women have a privilege to carry the pregnancy. So society has to consider it a privilege, help women working and having it all. And of course the solution is social care, social care, social care. I totally agree. Is there a creche at UCL? Is there a creche at UCLH?
Yes.
So, but very difficult to get into. I rest my case.
Yeah, so maybe if we can have one more comment from the same row, and then we'll Rome.
My name is Efia Yasmin, and I'm one of the reproductive medicine consultants at UCH and a colleague of Dr. Shenfield. So thank you, a very, very interesting debate, and I must say, because it resonates very well in terms of what we actually encounter in clinical practice while speaking to women and clients that come to us. So one thing that we have a problem with in social egg freezing is we don't have any long-term data. When we take it very clinically, so that the individual can make an informed choice as to what is the success rate, we are extrapolating from different, like from the donor section, from pre-chemotherapy egg freezing, that sector. And we do not know the long-term effect of children born from ICSI or frozen eggs. So that is a point to be noted, I think, and borne in mind.
Thank you. Sure.
Hi, thank you to both speakers. They were really good presentations. I'm thinking that there's maybe a third scenario that hasn't been talked about. So you mentioned that companies funding social egg freezing would increase the employability of women, but I'm thinking that maybe what about women that don't want to go through egg freezing and just want to have natural conception. So how is that going to affect their employability when they are competing with women that would maybe, agree or sign a contract that would kind of force them into egg freezing?
Very good point. Yeah.
So that's
A
it.
comment and reply.
So this is all quite new, this company funding this treatment. In today's society, I would be absolutely astonished if they could discriminate against women that didn't opt for this. I think this, and when I mentioned it, I did say I'd assume they'd also improve their childcare as well. I think we have to push for that. Childcare in the UK, and well, worldwide, is appalling. When I was in Russia a couple of years ago, they said it's totally impossible. They cannot afford it. Their whole wages would go on their childcare. So it's a global problem. And I did try to stress that I think we need to, yes, still encourage women to have children when they're younger or any age, naturally, but we also need to work on the childcare. We seriously do. So I can't believe any company could discriminate. I mean, they discriminate now unofficially, but there's papers in the newspapers all the time. There's cases of sex discrimination. So I think they'd be in really deep waters if they tried to discriminate.
Nikki, and then we'll have 3 more questions in a row.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to come back on that because I think that is a really important point, and I think the idea that companies don't already discriminate against women based on their reproductive choices is probably an optimistic one, and that this could potentially open up the opportunities for lots more discrimination around women who decide not to freeze their eggs, and also for women who don't want children. I mean, what does it assume? Why aren't men asked or offered, or why aren't there perks in men's employment contracts around things that would help them make decisions about when to have children? This just further re-ingrains the idea that if you're a woman, you will want to have a baby. That will be a problem, and you need to deal with it. So I think it's a really huge issue.
Thank you. Should we take a couple more hands? 2 more at that side, and then gentleman in the back.
Just a question about, we're talking mainly about the age of the egg in terms of fertility. Isn't the age of the sperm also somewhat of a consideration? I mean, I know we hear stories of 80-year-old men having children, but I can't imagine that a man's sperm at 80 is the same as a man's sperm at 20.
It's still functional, can still get pregnant naturally, certainly. The sperm doesn't have this problem with the chromosomes that a woman's egg has. Also, the woman's egg, as I said, it's a very large structure. It has a lot of important enzymes, proteins, genes that are responsible for the first more than week of development of the embryo. So it's got so many critical things in. A sperm is basically just a bullet of DNA. It's got the DNA. It doesn't even have to be swimming nowadays. We can get an immotile sperm and inject it into an egg and make a pregnancy. But the egg is a much, much more complicated structure. So the only issue that happens that we know about with men as they age, there may be some slight decrease in their sperm counts, but no one's done a study over 50 years to check someone's sperm count. There can be more mutations of the genes. So they are at slightly increased risk of having some single gene defects in the children. But we all know of cases of men in their 70s and 80s who have fathered children. I don't know why they'd want to father a child in their 70s or 80s, and I'm certainly not advocating that. I've said the age should be 50, and I don't know why anyone would want to say that.
Thank you. Was there one more question on this side, and then
Hi, my name's Natasha. I'm one of the MSc students from Joyce's course, and my question is about embryo freezing, because an embryo, which is the egg and the sperm together, studies have shown to have better outcomes compared to simply egg freezing. And I just wonder, does that then pressure the woman to find the partner to have the embryo to freeze? And does it make it even more unequal between the two genders?
Embryo freezing is too controversial. As I said earlier, I've been involved with a few cases when I worked in the laboratory where couples have got divorced and one wants the embryo back and the other doesn't. It could be the male or the female. And there have been lawsuits. There's been a case where a set of grandparents wanted the embryos back because both the children, the couple who made the embryo had died. Embryo freezing is really controversial. And as I've said, egg freezing takes out that controversy because we haven't then got an embryo, we've got just an egg. So the trouble is that if a couple got together and decided we want to have children, but in 5 years we'll get some embryos frozen now, it's just too risky. I don't think anyone would try to encourage that, because if they divorce or whatever, then it just brings up so many ethical problems. Egg freezing is simpler.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dimitri. I work in the reproductive medicine unit and I'm a lecturer at UCL. I just wanted to ask, in the 1960s when Edwards and Steptoe were first coming up with IVF, the issue of fertility wasn't an issue at all. And what happened then was the sexual revolution and the advent of birth control, which then informed the generation of women that are now coming up to be 35 and 40. And you talked about medicalization of women's body. So isn't the original medicalization birth control and egg freezing redressing that? Just to be provocative.
Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. And clearly medicalisation is not always negative. You know, we have lots of examples of medicalisation. The biomedicine in general, you know, has been great for humanity, shall we say, in lots of ways. So I don't necessarily suggest that all medicalisation is a problem. I think that medicalisation that intervenes unnecessarily becomes, you know, on the boundaries of a problem. And I think the other thing that's important to ask ourselves in relationship to medicalisation is who is it that's asking for this medicalisation and where does the impetus come from? And I think for me the problems with, you know, the contraceptive pill is freely available to everybody. You know, if we were to come to a place where that was the situation for social egg freezing, maybe that would be different. But at the moment, social egg freezing is very vested in a certain sector, a certain highly commercial sector, and it's being marketed quite robustly, shall we say. And I think for me that raises real problems about the collaboration between medicine and commerce and how that comes about. So I think it's about thinking about how technologies evolve, where they come from and who wants them in order to ask those questions. So I don't think you can compare the contraceptive pill and social egg freezing in quite the same way.
Just a comment. To take that to its extreme, the person who first commercialized the contraceptive pill suggested in the industry that the way forward, and this is controversial by far, the way forward is to all women freeze their eggs at age 18 or 20 and then have tubal sterilization. No.
Would we want that, girls? Yeah.
Leave that comment there. We have. I think so far we've heard a lot from professionals at UCL, and that's great. We do want to encourage people as well who may have come in who are not part of UCL or who are. Do you want to raise your hand if you have a personal story or if you're not currently working in fertility assisted technology? So 1 and 2, and then there's a. Should we say these? Maybe take 3 more, and then we do have to call time, unfortunately. If you could say your name if you want to.
Am I the one who's starting then, yeah? Sorry. My name is Stani. I am sort of visiting person here. The reason I'm here because I've sort of personally experienced fertility journey, and what I kind of wish that this kind of conversation, or I attended this kind of lecture maybe 20 years ago, where I could have perhaps started thinking about this, started thinking about a possibility that I might have a problem in the future when I decide to have children. It was just such a shock when it happened, sort of when my husband and I, when we started trying for a baby and it didn't happen, it was just such a shock, and sort of going through the, through the fertility journey. And not actually succeeding, it just kind of make me think that I should have had these thoughts and these discussions maybe 20 years ago. And I think this is so important to actually bring this topic to people's domain and to public domains, and where young sort of women can start thinking early on and make that choice. I understand that egg freezing is not guarantee that it will be successful in the future, that there will be sort successful through the fertility journey in the future. But at least I think it will give them sort of a little bit of hope. Whereas for me, I think that sort of, I have already passed that. I don't have that option of going back. So there's one less option for me. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that personal
Hi
story.
there, thank you for your talk. I completely agree with the sentiment of the previous speaker. I had a similar experience. The first time I found out about egg freezing was, I think, 7 years ago. My friend said she'd done it. Prior to that, you know, I have a law degree. I'm not ignorant, but I hadn't really thought about egg freezing. I've now lost a child through cancer. I've had 7 miscarriages. That's just to give you, that's only sharing that personal detail because I see so many young females in the room. I thought I was attractive, I was slim, men would look at me all the time. I thought when I want to settle down, it'll be easy. But finding the right man isn't so easy. So, you know, and when you're working with your career, it's not just about career, it's also about finding the right person, being in the right mental state. And when I was in my 20s, I didn't actually want children. So, and now I'm, you know, I wish I had frozen. But I think 20 might be a bit young, but when you reach 30 and you haven't, I think that's the time when you really need to work with your employer or pay for egg freezing. That's just my personal opinion, but I just hope someone actually takes heed of what I'm saying.
Thank you. I think there's one more comment on the back row, and then we do have to call it, I'm afraid.
Hi, thanks very much for the debate. I think there's no obvious answer, and it was really interesting to hear both sides. So I just want to make a point about kind of personal experience or personal views. So I'm 23, I'm the founder of a healthcare technology company, and I've got many friends who are sort of at a similar stage, and both male and female. One of the things that I've noticed is the women are very much in terms of planning careers and planning next steps, or even to take your other point about other things you want to do in life, are already thinking, how can I make these decisions so that I can think about when I need to settle down and start a family and what steps do I need to take right now at such an early age. And the men that I know are not really thinking like that. Well, some of them are, but not so much. It's not such a big strain. And I think what's interesting about this is really it's a way to give women the opportunity to make a choice where other factors are not influencing the things they're doing in the immediate future, which are potentially not at the stage where they would be thinking about a family anyway. Because one of the things that is potentially a problem career-wise is that you don't take opportunities or you don't take risks because of something that might happen 10 years in the future. So for me, even though there are kind of many medical risks and many other things to think about, that in terms of a social or a kind of equal setting is one of the most interesting points.
Thank you. I know there were other people who wanted to comment and contribute. Apologize that we're out of time. There's another session in this room at 2 o'clock. Just want to summarize and then thank our 2 excellent speakers. Social egg freezing, an opportunity, as Professor Harper has said, for more choice, more control for women to plan motherhood, or as Dr. Nicholson has suggested, actually not such a woman-friendly technology, but a seductive commercial enterprise that could potentially accentuate structural inequality. I want to thank everyone who commented, and I hope you'll join me in thanking our 2 excellent speakers.